Very good afternoon, all. Welcome back to our Department of Medicine academics. Today we have with us Dr. Rajesh Kanange. The topic will be at the Department of Virology, which will be HIV-1 drug resistance testing. Sir, Dr. Rajesh Kanange is a professor of clinical virology and faculty in charge of the retrovirus laboratory at CMC Vellore. Which is an NABL accredited national HIV reference laboratory. Well, serological testing for antibody antigen to HIV, CD4 takes estimation, HIV-1 viral load testing, HIV-1 drug resistant testing, and antibody to HL1 virus are carried out. He is also in charge of the external quality assurance scheme carried out by the National AIDS Control Organization at CMC, in coordination with the overseas and state reference laboratories and ICDs in Kerala and Lakshadweep for the HIV quality management. So he's also the coordinator of the National CMC Viro EQS program, an accredited program by NABL with ISO 17043/2010, and more than 500 laboratories across the country participating in both serological and molecular viral markers. So he's also a member of the Technical Resource Group, Technical Expert Committee for the strengthening and QA of the HIV viral load laboratory services for NACO and MOH and FW of GOI. So, as a member of Technical Expert Committee for Strengthening of Scientific Activities of Molecular Diagnostic Laboratory, National Institute of Biologicals, NIP, Noida. So, as a General Secretary for HICC CMC Vellore. His areas of research is in immunopathogens of infectious disease, with special interest in HIV and other bloodborne pathogens and opportunistic viruses. So, is also involved in several intramural and extramural funded research projects with more than 110 publications in peer-reviewed journals. So, as a recipient for Father Lodu M. Yadanapalli SJ Medal for the year 2013 towards excellence in research by a scientist physician less than 45 years of age at CMC Vellore. He is a certified NABL laboratory assessor for ISO and also with assessment also the PD provider for the assessment of more than 100 laboratories. For today's topic, I think it's a very relevant topic in our context for PG student level and for anyone who's interested in the disease was HIV-1, who manages it in our community setting and also in a tertiary or a secondary setting. If anyone misses out on this lectures, feel free to access this lecture in our Department of Medicine YouTube website. If any doubts through the sessions, please feel free to ask in person or can put down your questions in the chat box. Thanks a lot, sir, for agreeing to take this lecture for us, and over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Anju. At the onset, I would like to thank Department of Internal Medicine and Dr. Tambu for giving this opportunity to talk in this forum. So in the next 30-35 minutes, I'll try to cover the topic of HIV-1 drug resistance under these objectives, like virus structure and its replication, and the different antiretroviral agents available against HIV-1 and its mode of action, and the mechanism of resistance, and how will you suspect drug resistance in a patient who is on ART, and subsequently how to diagnose what are the different tests that is carried out in our laboratory for the detection of drug resistance, and a few research experience or data generated from CMC also I would like to share with you. Probably many of the slides may be basics and repetitive, but I thought though it is basic, it may be relevant for the topic. So, as you know, HIV belongs to the family Retroviridae, and it was identified or discovered in 1983. And this is the cross-sectional schematic diagram of HIV virion. Actually, the virus shape is actually icosahedral. What we have shown is just a cross-sectional section. So it's an enveloped virus, as you can see here. And envelope has got two parts. This is the lipid portion, and this is the glycoprotein portion. And the glycoprotein portion has got two parts, GP120 and GP41. Here, GP actually stands for the glycoprotein, and the number 120 or 41 is actually stands for the molecular weight of the protein. and GP120 is the virus receptor that will go and attach to the cellular receptor. So inside the envelope, you can see the core protein, that is the green circle, and inside the core you have the capsid or the P24 antigen. And inside the capsid, you have two identical strands of single-stranded RNA with the three important enzymes that is required for the replication of the virus. 2 units of reverse transcriptase, and then integrase and protease. So as I said, the virus receptor is GP120, and as all of you know, the cellular receptor is the CD4. So whatever routes it get into the human body, either through heterosexual route or through infected blood and blood products, or from an infected mother to the child, once it reaches the body, it will infect a cell which has got a CD4. And the two commonly available cells which has got CD4 receptor is the monocyte macrophage as well as the T lymphocytes. So initially it is thought that all the clinical manifestations or pathogenesis in HIV is mainly due to the immunodeficiency caused by the depletion of CD4 cells. But later, if you look at, you can see all the organs in the body has got a cell that has got a CD4 receptor. So starting from brain, HIV can directly infect the CNS using macrophages and glial cells. Lymph nodes and thymus, it can infect through lymphocytes and dendritic cells. And all the body fluids have got macrophages. And bone marrow has got lymphocytes, Langerhans cells in the skin. And in GIT, it has got chromaffin cells. And the lung has got alveolar macrophages. So basically, HIV can infect any organ in the body because all the organs contain some kind of a cells which has got CD4 as well as a co-receptor. Coming to the replication cycle, as I said, GP120 is the virus receptor and CD4 is the cellular receptor. But apart from CD4, it requires certain co-receptors, like these are two chemokine receptors, CCR5 and CXCR4. CCR5 is usually present in the monocyte macrophage lineage, and CXCR4 is present in the T cell. So one of these co-receptor is required for the entry of HIV1 into the cell. And usually when a virus infect, initially the virus will usually be macrophage tropic. So the entry of this virus to the cell will be through CCR5 co-receptor. So first GP120 will bind to the CD4 and subsequently it bind to the CCR5. And this binding actually causes some conformational changes in the GP41. And subsequently the GP41 will fuse with the cellular membrane, and the capsid along with the RNA and the enzyme will be pushed into the cell. And in the cytoplasm, the first enzyme, that is the reverse transcriptase enzyme, will convert the single-stranded RNA to double-stranded DNA, and this double-stranded DNA subsequently reaches the nucleus, and with the help of the second enzyme, integrase, the double-stranded DNA will be integrated into the host genome. So at this stage, this is called the provirus. So if the cell is not in an active state, for the time being, replication stops there. And subsequently, when the cell get activated, from this double-stranded DNA or integrated DNA, appropriate messenger RNAs will be formed, and that RNA will be converted to or translated into protein. And new viral RNA will be also released. And subsequently, assembly happens in the cytoplasm, and the new viruses buds out of the cellular membrane. But when it buds out, it will be an immature virus. It cannot infect a new CD4 cells because all the proteins are as a single polyprotein in the immature virus. That has to be cleaved into individual structural protein. That is taken care by the third enzyme, protease. And once that cleavage happens or individual proteins are formed, then the virus becomes mature, and subsequently this can infect the new cell. I'm sure all of you are familiar with this, but still I thought I'll just go through which are the currently available antiretroviral drugs. These are the major classes like nucleotide reverse transcriptase inhibitors and non-nucleoside reverse transcriptase inhibitors, which target the reverse transcriptase enzyme. Then there is a integrase strand transfer inhibitor, which target the integrase enzyme. Then there is protease inhibitor that targets the protease enzyme. Then there are actually different kinds of entry inhibitors which prevent the entry of the virus into the cell. And as you can see, initially almost all the viruses belongs to the NRTI, starting with 1986, the Sidovidin. It took about 10 years to identify a next class of drug. In 1995, a protease inhibitor, as well as in 1996, the first non-nucleoside reverse transcriptase inhibitor. And subsequently take another 10 years to identify integrase strand transfer inhibitors. Coming to the mechanism of these different enzymes. So first we will see the mechanism of entry inhibitors. First one is the fosretmosavir. This is the recently FDA approved drug in 2018, only given to patients who have got a highly resistant HIV-1 viruses. Usually this actually inhibit the interaction between CD4 as well as GP120, so that prevents the entry of the virus into the cell. So that is the first group of entry inhibitors. And second one is the monoclonal antibody isaluzumab. It actually attaches to the CD4 receptor and thereby inhibit the interaction with the GP120. And third one is actually the maraviroc, which is actually a CCR5 antagonist. It will go and bind to the CCR5 so that GP120 cannot bind to the co-receptor, and that will also prevent the entry. And the next one is the fusion inhibitor, enfutride. As you can see, this is the GP41, and it has got 2 heptad repeats. And this enfutride is actually an analog of HR2, so that it has got a complementary sequence with HR1. So this enfutride will go and bind to HR1 so that this interaction is stopped, so that the helical bundle and the fusion of the cell membrane between virus and the CD4 positive cells won't happen, and the fusion pore is not forming. Thereby it prevents the virus entry into cell. Coming to the second group of drugs, mechanism of action, that is the NRTI, nucleoside reverse transcriptase inhibitors. So as you can see, this will act on the reverse transcriptase. What is the function of reverse transcriptase? It will form or synthesize a complementary strand from the single-stranded RNA using the natural nucleotides available in the host cells. And NRTI is actually a nucleoside or nucleotide analog, but with a single difference. As you can see here, the deoxyribose group of the natural nucleotide has got a hydroxyl group. Actually, that is not available in the nucleoside analog. What is the importance of this OH group? That is actually required. The subsequent nucleotide will come and attach to this hydroxyl group only. So when the strand synthesis happens, the natural nucleotide can go and attach to the growing strand, and subsequently if natural nucleotide attaches, then the strand continuation happens. But in case the nucleotide analog go and bind, it doesn't have an OH group, so that subsequent nucleotide cannot bind. So there is a premature termination of the DNA strand. That's how the NRTI works. What about the non-nucleoside reverse transcriptase inhibitors? This is the reverse transcriptase enzyme, and this is the active site. Apart from the active site, it has got a pocket close to the active site. And this reverse NRTI molecules actually will go and fill inside that pocket, and that will actually make structural changes in the active site and thereby prevent the DNA polymerization or the addition of nucleoside. This is how NRTI works. Coming to the mechanism of integrase strand transfer inhibitors. So as we already mentioned, the RT will convert the single-stranded RNA to double-stranded DNA, and this double-stranded viral DNA will be attached with the integrase enzyme as well as the protease. This is called as the pre-integration complex. So this integrase enzyme, initially it will make a dinucleotide chip of dinucleotide from the either side of the both the 3' end and 5' end of the viral DNA, and also from the 3' end of the cellular DNA. And that is how it will transfer this double-stranded viral DNA onto the host cell genome. So the integrase inhibitors actually block this strand transfer by attaching to the integrase enzyme. So when this happens, what will happen to the viral DNA? It will be disintegrated by the cellular nucleoli, or it will form a circular DNA, viral DNA, and that cannot be integrated with the cellular chromosome. Coming to the last enzyme, that is the protease enzyme, which actually convert the immature virus into the mature, because in the immature virus, there will be a polyprotein, a single protein will be there that has to be cleaved. So this is actually the structure of the three-dimensional structure of the protease enzyme. It's a dimer. As you can see, each monomer is colored in different color, yellow and blue. And when it become a dimer, that is the catalytic site wherein the polyprotein will go and the enzyme will cleave into multiple proteins. So when you give a protease inhibitors, instead of this polyprotein, the protease inhibitor will go and get into this active site. Thereby it prevents the cleavage of the polyprotein. As you can see, this is the active site. So this is the normal function of the protease enzyme. The long polyprotein is cleaved or divided into multiple structural proteins. But when you give the protease inhibitors, that will go and bind to the catalytic site, and the cleavage or of the proteins, the polyprotein will not happen. Coming to the development of drug resistance. The development of HIV-1 resistant to HIV-1 to antiretroviral drug is one of the most common cause of therapeutic failure in people who are infected with HIV. And even under best of circumstances, whatever potent drugs given to the patient, at some stage, the patient can develop drug resistance, and it is a common occurrence. So what are the reasons for this development of drug resistance? One is the viral characteristics, because HIV infection is characterized by high levels of virus production and turnover. In a day, about a billion new virus particles are formed in an infected individual. And if you look at the duration of the HIV life cycle, it will take only 1.2 days on an average. And the half-life of a HIV infected cell is about 2.2 days. And the plasma-free virion has got a mean lifespan of 6 to 8 hours. And the average HIV-1 generation will take only 2.6 days. So every day, billions of new virus particles are formed in an infected individual. And another issue is actually the reverse transcriptase, that is converting the RNA to DNA, that is highly error prone, or it has got a less proofreading capacity. So whenever each replication happens, it can create a mutation. And since it has got a very poor proofreading capacity, that mutation it may not rectify. So every day there are about 10 to 6 particles are formed. Then you can understand how many nucleotide changes can happen in a HIV infected individual every day. So finally, what will happen is this genetic diversity give rise to the coexistence within one infected individual. Many variants, genetic variants will be there, and they are called as the quasi-species. There will be some kind of a difference in the nucleotides will be there in these strains that is existing in an infected individual. And this diversity, genetic diversity, will increase over time. And also touch upon the when to start the treatment. Actually, WHO has got several guidelines starting from 2002. And at that time, it was based on the WHO stage as well as CD4 count. Initially, it was 200 cells in 2002. And subsequently, in 2010, it became 350. And 2015, it became 500 cells to initiate the treatment. And in 15 itself, WHO actually started a test and treat policy that is irrespective of the WHO staging as well as CD4 count. A person can be started on ART as soon as he's diagnosed with HIV. India also adopted this test and treat policy in May 2017. And subsequently, the treatment is based on availability of the drug regimen. And the drug regimen is also selected based on the genetic barrier to resistance and also toxicity of the drug. And finally, the affordability. If you look at the ART activity, you can see two types of drugs. One drug with a low barrier, genetic barrier to resistance, and another group of drugs which has got a high genetic barrier to resistance. When you say low genetic barrier, what does that mean? These drugs easily develop resistance with a single mutation is enough to cause resistance, and that single mutation can actually cause cross-resistant to all the drugs in that particular group. Best example is actually NNRTI, non-nucleoside reverse transcriptase inhibitors. And there are certain other drugs which has got a high genetic barrier because they are more durable, or in order to develop resistance, they require multiple mutations. And best example is the protease inhibitors. This slide actually shows the different drugs classified according to the genetic barrier to resistance as well as the potency. And different classes of drugs are actually marked in different colors. And if you take zidovudine, as you can see, the genetic barrier is actually about moderate, but the potency is very low. And certain other nucleoside reverse transcriptase as well as nevirapine has got a moderate potency, but genetic barrier is low. So it can easily develop, though it is potent, it can easily develop resistance. Coming to certain integrase inhibitors, you can see very highly potent, but again, the genetic barrier resistance is low. But one of the integrase inhibitors, that is dolutegravir, has got a high potency as well as high genetic barrier, and that is why actually in most of the national program now, efavirenz is going to be replaced by the dolutegravir. And as we already mentioned, one group, that is the protease inhibitors, has got again high potency and high genetic barrier, so they develop resistance when there are multiple mutations. Apart from these two factors, these are all drug-related factors, the genetic barrier as well as the potency. Another factor that can affect the development of drug resistance is the viral factor, that is the replication capacity of viral strain. So based on this potency and genetic barrier, you may select a regimen, but still there are other factors that can lead to drug resistance. At the end, the replication of the virus is depending upon an optimum or sufficient level of drug in the blood. So what are the certain factors that can reduce or insufficient drug level in the blood? One is a poor adherence. It can be due to different issues like social issues. It may be a regimen issue or because of toxicity to the drugs. And if you come to other drug level, maybe potency we already discussed, and maybe because of a wrong dosage, then certain host genetic factors, poor absorption of the drug, or drugs has to be activated, so there can be a poor activation or rapid clearance of the drug from the body, or the person may be taking several other drugs for other morbidity, so there can be drug interaction. All this can actually reduce the drug level in the plasma, and that can actually lead to viral replication in the presence of a drug, and that lead to resistance virus. So finally, this is what happened initially. Yeah, because of the high turnover as well as the proofreading problem with the reverse transcriptase in an infected individual, there can be multiple variants, and many of the variants may be susceptible to a drug, but there can be some variants which are resistant to drug. And when we start on the treatment, drug stops replication of all the susceptible variants. But under the drug pressure, the HIV variant which is resistant to drug start multiplying at later stage. That will become the predominant virus circulating in the blood. There are two types of HIV drug resistance. One is the resistance developed during the course of the infection. That is again because of the high turnover as well as the RT issues. And in a treated individual, as shown in the previous picture, if a mutant variant is there, under drug pressure, that can get multiplied and that become the predominant one. The second group of drug resistance is the transmitted drug resistance. That is, a person can get infected with a virus which has got a drug resistance mutation. And this kind of transmitted drug resistance is seen in 10 to 24% in developed countries. There are only very few data available from low income as well as middle income countries. And in all those countries, actually, the prevalence of transmitted drug resistance is less than 5%. Only one issue is that if you are planning to detect the transmitted drug resistance, you should look for the virus as soon as the person is infected with the virus. Because subsequently what will happen is, again, all these viruses which has got a mutation will be less fit for replication. So that if the wild virus will be already there, and that will start replicating very well, and finally that will become the predominant virus circulating. So that it will be difficult to detect a mutant virus, or only we can detect is the wild virus. Coming to the mechanism of drug resistance, in nucleoside reverse transcriptase, we have seen how the nucleoside reverse transcriptase drug act. So if a mutation happens in the RT gene, especially certain mutation like 184B, usually seen with lamivudine, and K65R, usually seen with tenofovir, it occurs at or near the drug binding site of the reverse transcriptase enzyme. And this mutation can actually result in increased drug discrimination of the nucleotides. So it will discriminate the nucleotide analog. So the mutant RT actually incorporates the NRTA triphosphate less efficiently, and it will incorporate the natural nucleotides instead of the nucleotide analog. And that is actually responsible for the elongation of the chain and development of drug resistance. The second mechanism of drug resistant NRTA is especially among the thymidine analog mutations. When that happens, there can be some structural change in the RT enzymes, and ATP can actually go and bind at the site. If that mutation is not there, ATP cannot bind. But whenever there is a mutation, there's some structural changes happens, and ATP can go and bind here, and actually it will cleave the nucleotide analog which is attached to the elongate chain. And that also actually finally lead to the elongation of the chain with the attachment of the natural nucleotides. So this is the mechanism that is happening in a nucleotide reverse transcriptase inhibitors. What about NNRTI? As we said, the NNRTI molecule go and bind in this pocket. So certain mutations actually happens close to that pocket, so that the drug, again, there will be a structural difference and drug cannot go and bind into that groove. But one particular mutation, or the one important mutation that can happen in nevirapine and efavirenz, is the K103 and it doesn't, this particular mutation is not happening near inside the pocket, but it happens actually near the entrance to the pocket. And what it does is actually it creates a hydrogen bond in the reverse transcriptase enzyme, and always keep this pocket closed so that the NNRTI drug cannot go into that particular pocket. That's how the K103N create the drug resistance. Coming to the mechanism of resistance in PI. So most of the PI mutation, if you look at, it happens at this area, the substrate cleft. So that actually reduces the binding affinity of the protease inhibitor and this protease enzyme. Certain times, mutation can also happen in the flap, and in order to fully function, the enzyme should be in a closed state. Then only the enzyme can actually cut whatever substrate is there. But whenever there's a mutation in the flap, it cannot be closed completely, and whatever the substrate or the protease inhibitor comes in, it will go out. That's how the drug resistance happens in protease inhibitors. Now coming to, when will you suspect a drug resistance? This is actually a diagram showing the natural history of HIV. After the infection, this is the CD4. There will be a drop in CD4. And subsequently, once the immune response starts, the CD4 level will go up, but it won't reach the initial stage. The average CD4 count in Indian is about 900 cells per microliter. And subsequently, every year, there may be a 50 to 70 cells drop. And in another 8 to 10 years, it may reach around 200 cells. What happened to the viral load? Again, during that initial phase, it will be in billion copies. And when the immune response starts, it will a set point. But again, a slow amount of replication will be always there in HIV. And when the CD4 level goes beyond 300 or 200, again, the viral load starts increasing. So regularly, when you are going to monitor the patient with a viral load or CD4, this is what we are looking at. If there is when a patient is started on a treatment, there will be an increase in CD4 count, and there will be a decrease in HIV viral load, and subsequently the viral load become undetectable. But when they're suspecting failure, again, there can be a detectable viral load, as well as the CD4 can come down. So WHO has defined failures based on these two markers, as well as based on clinical manifestations. So it's a virological failure. When you say it's a virological failure, the viral load should be more than 1,000 copies per ml based on 2 consecutive viral load measurements in a 3-month interval. When you say there is an immunological failure, CD4 count at or below 250 cells per microliter following clinical failure, or persistence of CD4 levels below 100. Among children, again, less than 5 years, below 200 cells, and older than 5 years, persistent CD4 level below 100 cells per microliter. Clinical features, again, appearance of new or recurrent clinical event that indicating a severe immunodeficiency. So among these, which is the best marker to detect failure early? Till 2015, WHO was actually, as per the guideline, the patient has to regularly undergo CD4 testing, and that in order to look for immunological failure. And when they come for based on the clinical manifestation, clinical failure also can be detected. But in 2015, as per the guideline, WHO, the best marker for the follow-up or to detect the treatment failure is viral load. So as you can see, whenever there is a treatment failure or drug resistance, the first marker to appear is actually the detectable amount of virus in the blood. It will take another few weeks or months for the CD4 levels to start come down. And again, it may take few more weeks to months for the patient to develop clinical manifestations. So the best marker to identify treatment failure or to detect treatment failure early is the HIV viral load. So in 2015, till 2015, this is what WHO was recommending, is a targeted viral load. That is, when there is a clinical or immunological failure, you are supposed to do the viral load. And if it is more than 1,000 copies, just analyze the adherence issue and give a step-up counseling for adherence. And after 3 to 6 months, again, you can repeat the viral load. And if it's again more than 1,000, you can suspect failure. But if it is less than 1,000, you can continue the therapy. But in 2015, WHO actually started doing routine viral load. That is, once the patient is started on treatment, at 6 months, you can do the first viral load. And thereafter, every year, you can do the viral load. And this actually is the same. India started this viral load testing as a follow-up test from 2018 February. But still in the national program, the drug resistance, when the suspect treatment failure, there is no drug resistance assay is available as part of a national program. It is done in only very few centers, including us. So based on the viral load itself, they will switch the second line therapy. So when you suspect treatment failure, it's always better to do drug resistance testing, and based on the drug resistance pattern, the regimen can be changed. So what are the methods available for detection of HIV drug resistance? There are two types, genotypic and phenotypic assay. So genotypic assay actually detect the mutations that can lead to drug resistance, and phenotypic assay actually look at the drug susceptibility. And among these two, most of the centers actually carry out genotypic testing because it is comparatively cheap and wider availability as well as shorter turnaround time. So how will you carry out the HIV phenotypic testing? So once you collect the sample from the patient and you isolate the viral RNA and convert it into DNA used by PCR, and this actually amplification is only for the pol gene. That is the polymerase gene that is encoding for all the enzymes. So that is what we are interested in. So after the amplification, this will be the amplified product will be put it in a vector, and that vector will be transfected in a cell line that will have a reporter gene. So when there is replication, the reporter gene we can detect, and the amount of the reporter gene will be proportional to the amount of the virus. So we will do this with the test virus, that is from the samples from the suspected patient as well as a susceptible virus. And what we are looking at the drug concentration that can actually inhibit the viral replication by 50%. So this drug concentration to inhibit the susceptible virus as well as the test virus we look at, and a ratio will be calculated. That is, for this test virus, how much fold increase in concentration is required to inhibit. And based on that, you can say that particular strain is resistant or not. So only issue here again, if you wanted to look for individual drugs, so you have to set up multiple experiments to find out the drug resistance. And this also will take about 1 week for the whole experiment. Coming to the genotypic, here again, the initial part is almost same. So we will amplify the pol gene, and subsequently this is about 100 base pair, and this pol gene is actually sequenced. And once you get the sequence, the sequence can be submitted to the HIV standard database, Stanford, and look for mutations that can actually lead to drug resistant to different drugs. So this is what we do. Once the sequences are ready, it will be submitted to the Stanford HIV drug resistant database. And once you submit it, it will compare with the database and generate the report. As you can see, this is one of the sample. We have, after sequencing, we have put it into the Stanford University database. And this is actually for the looking for any mutation. Compared to the database, there is no major mutation that can found in the protease gene. But if you look at the gene that is encoding the RT, there are several mutations that can lead to NRTA resistance as well as NNRTA resistance. So this database is also actually based on in taking care of the phenotypic data, because as you can see, there are certain scores given for each mutation. And the score is actually based on the fold increase in the concentration of the drug required to inhibit 50% of the virus replication. So as you can see here, the K65R score for abacavir is 45, tenofovir is about 60. So it's very high because this mutation actually cause the concentration of the drug required to inhibit 50% very high. That's how it is also getting a very high score. But in certain cases, some of the mutation may not cause increase in concentration of the drug to inhibit the virus. So the score will be low. Finally, a cumulative score is taken based on the number of mutations seen in one particular strain. And any score above 60 is taken as high level resistance. Between 30 and 59 is intermediate resistance. And between 15 to 29 is low level. And 10 to 14 is potential low level resistance. Anything between 0 and 9 that is susceptible to that particular drug. So this is how, once we finish the genotype testing, report is sent. We will show what are the mutations for the NRTA as well as NNRTA, then protease, and also we will put in the susceptibility result for each drug. So these are the major mutations that can seen in the reverse transcriptase, nucleoside reverse transcriptase inhibitors. Actually, there are about 350 amino acid which is encoding for the RT gene, and that can be inhibited by the nucleoside reverse transcriptase inhibitor. And these are the different positions in which you can have a mutation that can actually lead to a drug resistance. For example, at 184 MV, that is actually responsible for the lamivudine resistance. Or if you take, and there are thymidine analog mutations like M41L, D67N. So the number is the position of the amino acid, and this particular alphabet is actually is the amino acid that is present in the wild type. And the second, the alphabet coming after the number is the amino acid that is mutated. So when you say 184, M184V, M is the amino acid in the wild type, and V is the amino acid in the mutated amino acid. Actually, that can lead to lamivudine resistance. Same way, these are the different positions in the mutation that can actually lead to non-nucleoside reverse transcriptase inhibitor resistance. And these are the positions in protease, and these are the one in integrate strand transfer inhibitors. If you look at the first line treatment, most of the studies have shown that these are the common mutation that can arise. The patient is on 3TC and FTC, most of them will have, if they are failing, they will have M84V, that is high resistant to lamivudine. And whenever there is a mutation, that can also reduce the fitness of the virus. And one advantage of this is actually that will delay the appearance of thymidine analog mutation and also increase the susceptibility to pseudovidin. Then these are the different terms when your patient is on zidovudine and strividine. And the resistance to different drugs actually depend upon the number of terms present in an individual. More the term, there will be more resistance. Then there is a Q51M as well as an insertion at the 69 position that can actually lead to resistance to tenofovir. And K65R again can lead to variable resistance to tenofovir, abacavir, and adenosine. And K65R can also increase the susceptibility to pseudovidin. And these are the two common mutations that is observed with NNRT, nevirapine and efavirenz, and even a single mutation actually can lead to a high resistance in both these drugs. Though genotyping method is preferred compared to phenotype, there are certain limitations of genotype testing. One is during the collection of the sample or testing, the patient should be on the drug, that particular drug. Because if the drug pressure is not there, as I already mentioned with the transmitted drug resistance, after a few weeks or months, the circulating virus will become a wild virus because mutated virus will have less fit and wild virus will overtake the replication and that will become the predominant one. So when you collect the sample, patient should be on the regimen. And for the sequencing, we are using a Sanger sequencing, that is a population sequencing. So whenever a variant is present in more than 20% of the total viruses, then only we will be able to detect the mutation. The percentage of one particular variant is less than 20%, we may miss it. But this can be overcome by doing a next generation sequencing. And in order to amplify the Pol gene, the viral load should be always more than 1,000, at least more than 1,000 copies per ml. Though it is cheaper than phenotypics, still it is not very cheap. It is a costlier test. And finally, once the results are ready, multiple mutation interpretation is also difficult. This actually, India started the national program, the ART program in 2004. And in 2014, actually, a group from National Institute of National AIDS Control Research Institute actually did a analysis. And there were actually 23 studies looked at the mutations in patients who have experienced ART. And all these patients actually either had a clinical or a immunological failure, and subsequently they carried out the testing, and the sequence with any mutation leading to a drug resistance was close to 80%. And NNRTA mutations were actually higher than the NRTA mutations. And both the TAM1 and TAM2 mutations were available. And as you can see, because almost all regimen contains lamivudine, so if you take individual mutation, that is the highest mutation seen in. Actually, one of our study from CMC also actually part of this analysis. And this is actually, again, the same analysis, the temporal trends seen in the NRTA. As you can see, 184B was actually there on the top, starting from 2004 to 2014. And the last one is the K65R, usually seen with tenofovir. As you can see, the tenofovir regimen actually started only late, I think after 2012. So the study also showed, if you take from 2004 to 2014, there was a significant increase in the presence of K65R. And we also actually looked at our data of the percentage of K65R between 2015, 13.8% of the samples which came for drug resistance showed K65R, but in 2009 it was about 31.8. Actually, more and more patients actually were on tenofovir, after 2013. Coming to the certain data from CMC, we actually looked at the structural basis of drug resistance in HIV type 1 subtype C, protease as well as RT using computer modeling. And these are the findings we noticed. One is the RT mutations were primarily seen in our molecular modeling studies to affect drug efficacy by a number of ways. One is by altering the geometry of the drug binding pocket, and it can disturb the entry of the drug into the active site. And as we already said, it can discriminate the inhibitors from the natural substrates. And in NNRTI, what we have seen is the altered geometry, and that actually prevent the drug binding and entry of the NNRTI into that hydrophobic pocket. And regarding the protease inhibitors, most of the mutation we have observed were in the flap. As already mentioned, if the mutation in the flap, it will not close properly and it won't allow the substrate or the protease inhibitor to be at the binding site or the active site. Recently, we also looked at the frequency of cross-resistant to the second generation non-nucleoside reverse transcriptase like rilpivirine as well as etravirine. In that study, what we have seen is most of the patients on efavirenz had K103N, and those who were on nevirapine-based regime had B90I mutations. And B90I mutation was almost similar with the patients on efavirenz also. And the second most common mutation seen in the patients undergoing nevirapine were Y181C. And when we looked at the cross resistance, majority of the patients actually showed cross resistance to both rilpivirine as well as etravirine. But the susceptibility was lower in patients who had nevirapine-based regimen compared to efavirenz regimen. But as you can see here, about 60% of the patients actually showed resistance to rilpivirine, and though they are not on that regime, they were only on nevirapine efavirenz-based regime. So it's a cross resistance. And we also actually looked at the frequency of transmitted drug resistance, that is patients who are not on treatment. And this we have done as soon as the patients were diagnosed with HIV, but we don't know when exactly they have got the infection. And what we have seen is, again, only 2.4% of the individuals had transmitted drug resistance mutations, and all were actually with NNRTI. And yeah, this actually correlates with almost all studies done in low and middle income countries where the frequency of transmitted drug resistance is less than 5%. Coming to the last few slides, actually one of the issue with the development of drug resistance is many of the patients will have undetectable viral loads, and that can actually, and those patients can actually transmit the infection. And the current slogan, if you look at both while WHO as well as the NACO, is the U is equal to U. That is, when you person is on treatment and if it's undetectable viral load, that equals to untransmittable. So development of resistance actually increase the transmission of the infection. Second issue, as all of you know, the WHO has a plan to eliminate HIV by 2030, and they had an interim target of getting this 90-90-90. The first 90 actually stands for all of the estimated HIV infected individuals, at least 90% should be confirmed by laboratory tests. And the second 90 is of these 90% confirmed by laboratory tests, 90% should be on ART. And the third 90 is among those 90% started on ART, 90% should be having undetectable viral load. And it was supposed to reach the target by 2020, but I'll show right now where we are worldwide as well as India. And India is actually again based on the NACP program. The new target is actually for 2024. It should be 95, 95, 95. So we'll see whether we'll be able to reach there or not. And this is the current global and Indian status. So the first 90, that is among the estimated, those who have diagnosed with a laboratory test, global status is about 81, India is about 76. And among those on ART, yeah, India and global is almost at the same stage, about 83 and 84%. And undetectable viral load, those who are on ART is about 88% globally. But Indian data has a problem because till 2018, we were using CD4 as the monitoring test, and viral load we started only in 2018, February. So there are about 2 million HIV, 2.1 million HIV infected individuals, and of which about 16 million are on ART. And of those 16 million, till 2020, we were able to test only about 5.6 lakhs. So there are about 10 lakh people who are on ART hasn't even started monitoring with viral load. But based on that 5.6 lakhs, we can see that about 84% of those 5.6 lakhs showed a viral load less than 1,000 copies. So in another 3 years, actually, this has to reach 95, 95, 95. So drug resistance can also actually play an important role in achieving this target, because if more and more patients are going to have drug resistance, then this part will be very difficult to achieve. So in summary, there are several factors that can lead to drug resistance in a HIV infected individual. One of the most important viral factor is the highly error prone reverse transcriptase enzyme that can lead to high diversity, genetic diversity when the virus replicates. And some of these variants can affect the activity of the antiretroviral drug that actually lead to resistance. And the resistance can actually happen because of inadequate or suboptimal level of ARVs in the blood. That actually allows small level of replication in the body and thereby selects the resistant virus to predominantly circulate. And when the resistant mutation happen, that can affect only a single drug, but more often what we will see is it affect an entire class of drugs. And we also looked at the different genetic barriers of different drugs. And coming to the detection of drug resistance mutation, the currently employed and the best user-friendly method is the genotypic method. And treatment and prevention of resistance involves selecting a new regimen that avoids drugs to which the virus is resistant. But most important is to find out what is the underlying factors responsible for the development of resistance, so that it can address both resistance as well as prevent further resistance. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I think that was a very relevant topic which has been explained in a very simplified way. Any questions, please feel free to ask or put down in the chat box. I think it needs, like how we highlighted the fact that the transient drug resistance needs to be addressed in terms of having a combination of drugs even combined drug therapy. and the fact that we do it across the class than in a single group of class. So that part again and again gets highlighted. Like when we have seen people also coming up from outside on a monotherapy, so, and other things.
Always.
The other thing was that to be in a treatment naive patient, is there any point in doing a drug sensitivity testing, or I mean, you said it's only 2.4%.
Yeah, one is actually WHO, I think, is telling if it is more than 10 to 15% only, there should be a regular drug resistant testing before starting the treatment. And another issue is, again, I already said, if the patient is infected few months or few years back, by the time he comes, all the resistant mutant would have been overcome by the wild type, because all the viruses which has got a mutation will be less fit. It won't replicate as wild type. So the wild type virus will be the one which will be predominant in the circulation than the one. So it will be difficult to detect. But you can actually look, all these mutations will be archived in the lymph nodes or in the memory cells. So if you look resistance in PBMCs, probably you will be able to identify the mutation.
This selectivity which happens because when you're on a drug and we giving we testing and then finding out resistance and changing out another drug, and we again agree allowing the wild type to grow up. And does it have it down the line, like how we don't know, like initially how many start as a treatment aid? Down the line, when is there a possibility of patients being reintroduced on these drugs which were like had resistance initially?
Yeah. Basically, patient had a mutation for one particular drug, and later you are starting that particular drug. Yeah, that archaic mutation that can happen when again if the drug level is not optimum, some kind of a drug pressure is there. Yeah, that time that can actually start replicating, and all the susceptible will anyway won't be there. This particular variant will become the predominant one.
Any questions? Are we having patients being now sitting at least like having this viral load being checked on to the extent that we have been the guidelines are not, or we also lagging back on?
No, actually, my understanding is that whatever patients under the national program in CMC, I think almost all patients actually been tested at least once, and many of them actually even tested twice. That is after one, because we started in 2018. So many of them actually even come for a second visit also. Now I think there's a plan to change the regimen, no, from efavirenz to Doltiga based regimen. So I think, yeah, before that, the program, I think everybody wanted to get tested.
Cost-wise, we do have a backup from the government, or we are for the virus?
Viral load. Actually, we have two streams. Patients who are under national program, it is a free testing because government will give all the kits, reagents, as well as the equipment. But for the CMC patients, it is charged.
Thank you, sir. I think this lecture will soon be uploaded on our medicine website and YouTube. If no further questions, I will wind up for today. Thanks again, sir, for agreeing to take this lecture for us. It was an honor to have you coming down to have a lecture taken for us at this level, for the PG specifically. We'll wind up for today.
Thank you. Thank you.